A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all once again to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So, we will start today with the quote of the day. B.R. Ambedkar once said that a great man is different from an eminent one in that he is ready to be the servant of the society. So, this quote, as you can see, shows to us the significance or the importance of the labor and the workers in society. So the workers or the laborers have been assigned the status of a great man because that's what they do to the society. Even Swami Vivekananda once said that service to Jiva is worship of Shiva. So that is the status that has been given to the people who render services in the country. So let's on May 1st, that is Labor Day, take this moment to applaud all the frontline workers who have been fighting on our all behalfs the battle for against the coronavirus. With this, we will start the first topic of the day, which is the right to information. So why this was a news is because somebody wrote an RTI request asking the election commission whether the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir will it be a part of the electoral college for the election of President of India. So in response to this, the EC has sent a single line response saying that for the information, the applicant may be informed to refer Article 54 of the Constitution of India. So this was a single line reply that the Election Commission is given to the RTI request. So this has brought to fore the significance of RTI and also the how it has been functioning in the country. So we will use this as an opportunity to analyze how RTI has been working. So let's come to the basics. The RTI movement in India was first started in Rajasthan by an NGO named as Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which was founded by Aruna Roy, who was an IAS officer, and she left her job to involve herself in this movement. So this took place in the 1990s, and we finally had the legislation in 2005. So when we consider at the international level, we first had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was in 1948, and it spoke about the right to seek and receive information. Similarly, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1966 also spoke about the freedom of expression and the right to seek and receive information. So even Thomas Jefferson, once he remarked that information is a currency of democracy. So it shows the importance of information in a democracy. So when the RTI was enacted, it has basically fourfold main objectives that it sought to achieve. One is empowering the citizens. Why? Because knowledge is power, and so this through providing information and being open to the people and giving them information is then empowering them. So empowering the citizens, then ensuring transparency and accountability in the functioning of the government, thereby reduce corruption in the governance of the country, and also increase the people participation in the governance. So these were the fourfold objectives with which the RTI was started, the legislation was enacted. So now let us see. So here you can see that it will help us improve accountability. It will make the governance more participatory and also transparent. It will lead to an open government where there will be accessibility to information, collaboration with the people, and innovation. So this is a basic procedure that has been specified in the Act. So whenever a citizen wants any information, he will request the same to a public information officer. So for giving some information, some costs will be incurred. For example, if the person asks some information for which some thousands of pages of photocopies to be taken, so that is going to incur cost. So in which case the PIO will mention the costs and the citizen will pay the cost. After that, the PIO is responsible to provide the information that has been asked within a time period of 30 days. So either if the public information officer refuses to provide the information, or there is no response within the first 30 days, then the citizen can go and file a first appeal to the appellate authority. So this appellate authority is again required to give the information within a period of 30 days. And also, once the PIO has refused the information, then the citizen has to do the first appeal within a period of 30 days. And after the appeal, the appellate authority has to give the information within a period of 30 days. So if the citizen is again not satisfied with the information that is given by the appellate authority, or the appellate authority refuses to give the information, then the citizen can again go for the second appeal. The citizen can go to the second appeal within 90 days from the refusal or the citizen not being satisfied with the information given by appellate authority. So when the citizen goes to a second appeal, in the second appeal, the citizen goes to the state or the Central Information Commissioner. So this is a basic hierarchy through which, and the basic procedure how the functioning happens. So now let's see several issues that has been associated. As we saw that the Election Commission has given such a vague one-line reply to the person. So there are similar issues that are present in the Act. So we will have a look at this. So first of all, we will see Section 4 is one section which is very important, has been in news. So that talks about suo motu disclosure of information by the public authorities. So these public authorities are required to voluntarily disclose a lot of information to the public, but this is not being done. In fact, a survey found that 70% of the RTI applications made by the citizens were not even required, because 70% of applications asked for that information which these public authorities had to voluntarily disclose. So this is not happening. And Section 4.2 says that the organizations, they have to maintain a computerized record system so that whenever information is sought, it can be timely and accurately given. But this maintenance of computer records is again not happening. So this is the issue with respect to Section 4. So next, there is a section called Section 8.1, which talks about the exemptions to the disclosure of information. So there are several exemptions like judiciary or the cabinet papers, or any information that has been revealed as part of an international, like friendly relations between the foreign countries. So that is there. And then any information which, if revealed, could prejudice an investigation that is going on, or something that is related to the privacy of the individual, or the information that is there with the CBI, RAW, and other such armed forces organizations, intelligence organizations, all of these, IB and all. So they don't have to provide the information under Section 8. So it talks about exemptions. So the criticism with respect to this is that it is very much possible that corruption can happen in these institutions also, and by exempting them from providing the basic information, again it leads to a lot of vague exemptions, and for every information that is sought, it could be told that that is exempted under Section 8.1 by some or the other way. So this is the second issue. Then third, also in Section 8.2 says that except more often than not, whenever an information is sought by a person, the government says that this information cannot be given because in the Official Secrets Act it cannot be given. So it seeks the shelter of the Official Secrets Act basically under this. So it says that Official Secrets Act, under this it cannot be given. So this is another issue. Then also it is seen that there is a lot of vacancy when it comes to the Information Commission. So this vacancy has, for example, in the Central Information Commission itself, there are 4 vacancies, which has led to nearly 33,000 pending cases. So this lot of vacancy which has been a hurdle in providing timely response to the RTI queries. And then most of the times it is seen that because the time limit that has been given is 30 days, the PIO and the appellate authorities has to respond to the information request before 30 days. But this responsibility has been given to the existing officials only. So in an organization, one officer is designated as a public information officer, and that officer will have to do other responsibilities and other works will continue apart from this. So the officer is overloaded, and therefore he won't be able to heed to the requests timely. So this is also happening. And then also this is used sometimes for very personal uses, which don't really involve any public interest. For example, if somebody wants to be in the limelight, or just for some vindictive tool for personal vendetta, so that is also for these reasons also it is used. And then again, when it comes to the any act in general, the level of awareness among the people is very low about the acts. So this is again an issue. Later on you can talk about the political parties. So this is a very important objection issue that is associated with RTI, that political parties are not a part of the RTI, but they do get huge donations from the corporates, and there are fears of crony capitalism also, and they also get a lot of foreign funding. So it is being told that political parties must be brought under RTI, but they are not so at present. And this again, why? Because the political parties, they say that they are not public authorities as per the definition of the RTI Act. So because of this particular definition, one, the political parties are not under the RTI, and there was also a huge issue about whether BCCI can be under RTI Act, because according to this definition, even BCCI is not a public authority. So next you can say is, one, that political parties are not under RTI, and then also that the definition of public authority itself has now been under the light. So, and also when you see the government's attitude or the government's support to this, you can say that government has also taken some initiatives and some amendments it has proposed to the act, according to which you can see that it is not much in support of RTI. For example, in 2013 it amended that political parties should not be part of the should not come under the purview of RTI. Similarly, in 2017 there was an amendment proposed which said that if there is a death of the application, there will be a closure of the case. So this would have increased attack on the whistleblowers. In 2018 there was an amendment proposed that the center will fix the tenure or the salaries of the State Information Commissioner and the Central Information Commissioner. So if this state center is to fix the tenure and the salary, that would definitely dilute the autonomy or the independence of the institute. So this is another issue. And also, once the Chief Justice of India had remarked that there has been an unbridled reference or use of RTI. So this huge use of RTI by the people has led to a sense of paralysis, and it has led to some kind of fear in the government, that fear among the government authorities before taking any steps. So they don't want to take any decision for the fear that tomorrow there will be an RTI query and somehow they will be fixed in some or the other scam or trouble. So this was even mentioned by the CGI. So this is also seen, for example, in the 2018-19 data, which shows that 11% increase was there in the RTI applications that were filed, according to the CIC report. So this shows that there has been this 11% increase over a period of a year. Again points to the fact that there has been so many unnecessary RTI applications that are being filed. So these are the various issues associated with the RTI Act in India. So apart from the issues, while if you are writing an answer, in that case you also have to mention some positive successes as well. So definitely you will mention about the 2G scam, the Commonwealth scam, the Colgate scam, and you can also mention how in Rajasthan the corruption and leakages that were happening in the PDS was finally brought to notice with the help of the RTI, because an RTI was filed on a particular PDS shop owner, that what quantity of grains are given to whom and all. So when the records were seen, it was found that a lot of leakages were there, and he had sold a lot of grains in the black market. So these things are there. And coming to the case studies, you can quote several. For example, there was this Jankari of Bihar, which the second ARC report also mentions, wherein the RTI requests could be taken over a phone call. So that is very easy also. And Rajasthan has what is called as a Jan Suchna portal. Jan Suchna portal, it helps in public disclosure of information, and under this portal it is integrating data from various schemes like employment generation program, sanitation, PDS, etc. And by integrating the data, it is also providing real-time information. So this is again very helpful. And also, if you are writing this as part of an answer, apart from the issues and the positive and some case studies and successful examples, you should also quote some judgments also. For example, in the CBSE versus Aditya Bandyopadhyay case in 2011, Supreme Court made a very firm statement. It told that nation does not want a scenario where 75% of the staff of public authorities spends 75% of time in collecting and furnishing information to the applicant instead of discharging their their regular duties. So Supreme Court said that because of the rise in the RTI applications, there should not be a scenario where 75% of the staff spends 75% of their time just by collating and disseminating the information, and they are forgetting about their regular duties. So this should not be the scenario. So with this, we will move on to the next topic. Before that, we'll just look at few other successes. There's this online RTI where we can file online RTI requests online also. So that has a lot of success stories which have been mentioned like this in a pictographic form. So there's this lady, MBBS intern, who files online RTI on a mobile app, and the college from the college, then she receives the stipend pending for 3 months. So similarly, this person was not getting his verified degree from the university, so an RTI application helped him get the certificate, and she wanted to get the death certificate of the father, which she wasn't getting. An RTI application helped her get that. So here also again some of the other success stories of RTI are there. So you can copy this slide, and you can take the picture of the slide and you can see this later. So now with this, we will go to the next topic, which is B.R. Ambedkar's role in labor welfare. So today we know it as May 1st, that is Labor Day. So as part of that, we will see what role Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has played as for labor welfare. And but before this, I also wanted to tell that there was another article on labor welfare that was written by Nikhil Dey and Aruna Roy. So Aruna Roy, as I just referred to in the previous topic of RTI, that she was an IAS officer who left her job and she took up this and she also told that RTI is an important tool for ensuring the accountability of government. And so through Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which is the NGO, so they propose that there has to be this legislation of RTI. So therefore, whenever you are writing about RTI, you can name such activists like Nikhil Dey and Aruna Roy. So that will add more value to the answer. And also in today's article that was written by both of them, they told what measures must be taken for ensuring the labor welfare. So first of all, they told that this Manrega, whatever is given, the 100 days of employment, that has to be extended to 150 days of employment given the current COVID crisis and people losing their jobs. Secondly, Manrega is concentrated in the rural areas, but there are several now jobless workers in the urban areas. So there has to be an urban employment generation program similar to Manrega. And thirdly, we must also explore possibilities of work from home for these kind of laborers. For example, making masks or soaps or sanitizers at home. And just like how Kerala involved its panchayats and self-help groups, so all these initiatives will have to be taken. So whenever you are mentioning a way forward for how we should deal with these laborers, you can quote these measures, and apart from quoting the measures, you can also mention the name of Nikhil Dey and Aruna Roy, so that will add more value to your answer. So now we will say what role Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has played. So as you can see, Dr. Ambedkar was the one who brought the 8-hour working day to India. So earlier it was 14 hours, and this was done after the 7th session of the Indian Labour Conference that was held in India in 1942. So at that time, earlier it was 14 hours a day, and that was brought down to the current 8 hours working day. So we'll see what measures were taken. So first of all, Dr. Ambedkar was went as a representative of the depressed class at the Round Table Conference, and there he demanded that the workers must have living wages and they must be having a decent working conditions. So this was the first demand that he made. And then secondly, in 1936, Dr. Ambedkar also set up the Independent Labour Party. So the main aim was so that the needs of these laborers have to be met, and if they have any grievances, that must be dealt with. And then third, he also opposed the introduction of the Industrial Disputes Bill in 1934, because this particular bill was actually, it restricted the trade unions, and it also removed the workers' right to strike. So that is why he believed that the workers' right to strike for any grievance or for any mishandling of the workers is very important. So therefore he opposed this particular bill, because it was it had a provision which removed the workers' right to strike. And then he also became the labor member in the Viceroy's Executive Council. So he became the labor member in the Viceroy's Executive Council between 1942 and 46. And then he also brought the Industrial Trade Union Amendment Bill into by amending, which was amended in 1943. So this compelled the employers to acknowledge trade unions. So the Trade Union Amendment Bill, it compelled the employers to acknowledge the trade unions. And also in the Constituent Assembly debates also, he spoke for lifting the ban on women workers in the coal mines. And then he told that both men and women who are working in the coal mines should get equal pay for equal work. And he also provided maternity benefits for the women who were working in the coal mines. So these were the steps, and these were the contribution of B.R. Ambedkar when it comes to labor welfare. And some of the present steps, as you may be knowing, include the Pradhan Mantri Shram Yogi Mandhan Yojana, which provides protection to the unorganized workers in their old age. Then there is the Shram Suvidha portal, which is again an example of e-governance initiative through which the labor laws are enforced. So it ensures more transparency and accountability. And we have also in a very detailed manner discussed the labor code, the 4 codes, its provisions and issues have already been discussed in detail. So these are all some of the information about the labor issues. So next we come to the topic patent pool. So yesterday we saw in detail about the intellectual property regime in India, and why India has been put in the priority watch list. What are all the issues with the intellectual property regime in India? So one possible suggestion, innovative suggestion, is that we can create a patent pool. So patent pool means what? It is just a pool into which the patent holders will just pool their patents. So then there will be a centralized agency which will manage these patents. And these patents will then readily be licensed to whoever wants to manufacture the product. So the patent holders will just pool in the patents. They will form a patent pool. This patent pool will be managed by a central agency, and the patents that form a part of this pool are then readily available for licensing. So whatever, if somebody wants to get it, then they will get the license, and for which they will pay the royalty. This royalty again gets distributed between whoever has pooled in the patents. So this way anyone who wishes to obtain a license can approach the agency, and then they will be able to approach this pool and agree to the terms, and they can start manufacturing and sell the products. So this way even these patent holders will get the license fee, and also person who or the company which manufactures the product will also have the right to manufacture the product by agreeing to the terms of the agent and accessing the patent pool. So this was one way forward for solving the issues related to the intellectual property regime in India. So next is one very good example of unity in diversity. So some group of musicians in the state of Manipur, so they have formed this music album that is titled Yes We Can. So what they have done is they have formed this album in not just Hindi and English, but also in several of the local languages in Manipur that are spoken by several ethnic groups in Manipur. So Manipur, as we all know, is known for its ethnic diversity. There are Nagas, there are Kukis, there are Metis, and there are constant clashes between them. So there are strained relationships with each other, and there have been several instances of ethnic violence. So this song, Yes We Can, they have formed this for two purposes. One is to express solidarity in the times of the pandemic crisis, that they all stand together and face this crisis and win over this. And the second is also to celebrate the ethnic diversity in Manipur. So this such soft initiatives can also inspire living together, and also it can in a way curb the ethnic violence and the clashes that are happening in the region. So many times it is possible that what force can't do, music can do, or any other such soft skills can do. So this is what this particular initiative through which the musicians are trying to do. So now we will discuss yesterday's question. I had asked to critically analyze the intellectual property policy of national policy of 2016. So now first of all we'll see, whenever you are dealing with any policy, analysis of a policy, in the first paragraph you can also start by saying in what context that particular policy was introduced. For instance, in this case, the national IPR policy came at the backdrop of the USTR report, special 301 report, which had put India on a priority watch list. So it was in this backdrop that the national new IPR policy was enacted in 2016. Or the another way of introduction is to define what intellectual property is. So intellectual property means it's just a legal right which is given to an intellectual invention, innovation, or discovery in it could be industrial field, it could be scientific, it could be literary or artistic field. So industrial, scientific, literary, or artistic fields. So usually these intellectual property rights, it will entitle an individual or a group economic rights because they have created something. So this is what it is. So then you have to talk about the features of the policy. So the features include, firstly, that compulsory licensing will be allowed, but however it will definitely be restricted to only those cases where there is a public health emergency such as epidemics. So that we are, on the one hand, we are compliant with the TRIPS, and on the other hand, it's trying to basically create a balance between access to public health and also promoting innovation and creativity. So that is compulsory licensing. Secondly, it has provisions to minimize the red tape that is involved in granting of intellectual property. For example, to approve a trademark, it took more than a year. So the policy said that by 2017, that is within 1 year, the time to approve a trademark should be just 1 month. So basically the policy was aiming to reduce the red tape that is involved in the processes. Third, it has made DIP as the nodal agency for regulating the IPR in the country. So therefore, when one particular department becomes the nodal department, so it will help in better convergence across everything. So this will be good, so that all the patents can be monitored by DIP itself. And fourthly, it will also promote outreach programs to create more awareness about the economic, social, and cultural benefits of IPR. So yesterday we saw examples for outreach, which includes IP Nani, which was the IP mascot and all that. Then it also emphasizes on commercialization. So there have been several scenarios where intellectual property is there, but then it is not commercialized. So which means the innovation is of no use. So this policy also emphasizes on commercialization of the IPRs so as to get value from them. And then it will also strengthen the enforcement mechanism so that any violations, any infringements doesn't go unpunished. The policy also states that there have been several groups, less empowered groups of IP, like for example farmers, weavers, artisans. So they have a lot of innovative capacities in them, but then they don't have the financial support so that they also go for the intellectual property, apply for intellectual property. So therefore the policy says that financial support will be given to these less empowered groups through financial institutions like rural banks or cooperative banks and all that. Then the policy also states that some of the Indian legislations like the Cinematograph Act, so they have certain anomalies and inconsistencies. So we are going to remove that also. We're going to streamline the legislative framework that is there. And also most importantly, it also said that this policy will be reviewed every 5 years so as to keep pace with further developments in the sector. So these are some of the features of the policy. So now we come to the issues in the policy. So firstly, several critics, they say that this IP policy is drawn on a flawed foundation. The foundation itself is wrong. Why? Because it has equated more IP is equal to more innovation. But this may not be the case always, because more IP could rather hinder the free flow of information, and thereby it might hinder the innovation in the country. So many innovators, for example like Elon Musk of Tesla, they are innovating without worrying about the intellectual property. So therefore increasing focus on IP could actually reduce the free flow of information, and that could in turn reduce the innovation itself. So therefore the policy itself is based on a flawed foundation. The second issue is that it assumes that IP is actually a good measure of innovation. So whenever you have to measure how much innovative a particular country is, you try to look at its intellectual property index. So, but several critics have pointed out that this is not true. For example, in the Indian pharmaceutical industry, India is the third world pharmacy of the third world because it has rejected a strong IPR system of the 1970s. Similarly, even Green Revolution took place without the IP protection for the breeder high yield variety seeds. So here there are several innovations, but it need not be measured with the help of IP. So that is what it means. Third is the IPR policy says that all those scientists and professors which have been publicly funded, they have to convert their discoveries to intellectual property. But critics point out that there have been several visionary scientists like Benjamin Franklin, J.C. Bose. These scientists have actually shunned patents because the patents have the potential to curb free flow of knowledge. So this is another criticism that is there on the policy. Then the policy says that as I said, among the features that we have to streamline some of our laws. So for that we may amend the Cinematograph Act. So this has been provided in the provisions of the policy. But what the policy has done is it has criminalized unauthorized copying of movies. So definitely we need to deal with piracy, but then criminalizing what is a civil wrong could prove to be disastrous. So criminalizing a civil wrong could lead to a case where this is abused at the hands of the police. So this should not happen. And also next other criticism is that it says there has to be more outreach and there has to be more awareness drives about intellectual property, for which even intellectual property should be taught to the students in the schools. So what critics point out is that IP to be taught in schools and colleges, that is not a good as such a policy, because what we need in schools and colleges are courses on creativity, how to be creative, and not just on what intellectual property is. So that is what they argue. And also they say that in the past this whole concept of intellectual property has come about only in the past century. Even before that there was no concept of intellectual property, but there was no dearth of innovation in India. India had a very glorious past when it comes to innovation. For example, Sushruta related to surgery, Nagarjuna related to metallurgy. India has hardly any noticeable technological marvels in the recent history after the IP regimes have come about in the countries. So this is what they say, that it need not be that strict as countries across the world want it to be. All right. So the next criticism is that in the policy, the whole emphasis is on generating the patents. But these patents, again, whenever a patent has to be generated, then for that, after that, it has to give some value. For example, the CSIR researchers, they were directed to file patents, but these patents could not earn CSIR any revenue. That revenue that CSIR earned from these patents did not even cover 4 to 5% of the cost that CSIR incurred on filing the patents. So therefore, the focus should simply not be on generating more patents, but rather those patents must also be viable. Another example for this is that China filed more than 1 million patents in 2015. But this resulted in a proliferation of low value patents that scored low on innovation because the focus was just on filing the patents. So, that again should not be the case. So, these are some of the issues with respect to the policy. And as a way forward, you can also say several other steps that have been taken and what should be done in the future. Like you can talk about the patent pool that I spoke today, and you can also talk about the other initiatives like science, technology, and innovation policies there. And 2020 to 2030 has been declared as the decade of innovation, and NITI Aayog has come out with several initiatives like Atal Innovation Mission and Setu and all of that. So with all these, and also you can come forward with suggestions that we need to increase the GDP in science research, which is at present some 0.88% of the GDP, while for United States it is 7 to 8%, and for South Korea it is 3 to 4%. So we need to increase our research spending to be able to innovate better. So with all of these things, and also combined with the yesterday's what I told in the IPR regime. So with that, you can write a good way forward. So today's question is discuss Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's views on equality in society. It's a 10-marker question for 150 words. Also, for today, it's been 1 month of the ICANN initiative. So I hope you're all feeling that it is helpful, and it will be helpful for you in the exams in answer writing. So if you have any suggestions, please do write. So that's it for today. Thank you.